Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. I'm Tammy Takeishi, and today's guest is cellist Daniel Saenz. Daniel Saenz has performed and presented master classes throughout South America, Mexico, and the United States. He is the Associate Professor of Cello at Sam Houston State University's School of Music, where he teaches cello and coaches chamber music. He is also the Executive Director and founder of Brazos Music, a non-profit organization in the Houston area, and is a member of the Kolonneh Chamber Players, a faculty ensemble, as well as being certified in all cello Suzuki method books. I'm so excited to have this wonderful musician on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to get started with who or what inspired you to become a musician?
That's a kind of a hard one, except that I could say that my brothers and my sisters, they were listening to lots of music when I was younger, but mainly pop music, anything from, Ozzy Osbourne and Crazy Train and the Beatles and everything in between, like Susie and the Banshees. But when I was younger, I wanted to play violin, that I knew. And in fifth grade, I went to my sixth grade, or my junior high. They had an open house for instruments, and so I wanted to play violin. Little did I know that they had a quota. Everybody wants to play violin. So I was already kind of tall, lanky, and they said, why don't you play the cello? So I strummed the cello, and I said, it looks like a guitar, sounds like a guitar, and I'll play it. And so that's how it was really a little bit at random that I chose it. But that's how I got into music. But I do remember early on liking music very much, and even classical music that they introduced me to it in my music classes in elementary school.
That's nice. Yeah, I completely understand about the violin thing. My older siblings played violin, but I actually wanted to play cello at the beginning. But I was too tiny to play cello.
I've learned a lot about bias in the last few years, and one of the biases that we have is body bias. And so in my teaching, I try to get rid of that because if we are truly following Suzuki method as like any child can learn, then we have to figure out how they can learn that instrument as well, just in spite of their body. And, people that have learned to play the cello with their feet, and violin with their feet. And you've seen that, right? Those videos, it's incredible. So it is possible to learn an instrument in spite of how we were born,
Yeah, I definitely think it's fantastic when people are able to use instruments in new creative ways, whether it's through an adapted instrument or an adapted device, because it's really about just expression and sharing music in whatever way we can.
That's right.
So you obviously became pretty passionate about music at a young age. Who have been some of your influences growing up, whether it's classical or otherwise?
I think directly there were teachers, because I'm a public school, the product of a public school education. And I always mention this to anybody I meet because, Texas, as you know, we have a big music education program in public schools. And I started in sixth grade, 11 years old. And just a few years later, I was able to, I was accepted into the Eastman School of Music. And looking back on it, there were several people that gave me a lot of time, a lot of love, and nurtured my love for music as well. Namely, they are Richard Clark, who retired from the McAllen Public Schools just a few years ago, Benjamin Ponder, who still is teaching in the McAllen Public Schools, and then Carter Enyart, who in that time, he was the professor at University of North Texas, and then he went off to UMKC. All of these teachers and many more gave me lessons for free. I think Mr. Ponder accepted whatever I could afford, maybe few times. So, they really gave me a lot of time. These lessons were not, an hour. Sometimes they were 2 or 3 hours. That's who I credit, my early successes to. Without them, I wouldn't have any. And then, of course, the orchestra teachers gave me a lot of time as well, and opportunities.
That's fantastic. And it's wonderful that you had so many people in your corner and encouraging and, not letting any barriers stop you from learning and really soaking that in.
Well, yeah, it's just a small story, really, of a bigger story. And a lady named Jackie Pride moved to the Rio Grande Valley I think in the 50s or early 60s. And she was always advocating for string education in the public schools. And it finally happened during her lifetime. She became fine arts director, I think, in McAllen, and after being an orchestra teacher for many years, she started the programs or helped to create them in Annaberg and the McAllen. Now it's string education is in all over the Rio Grande Valley, which is amazing to her credit, but also those that came before her as well. So I'm just a small story. It's interesting to think about this, but there are several of us that grew up at that time that became musicians. Some went to Juilliard, I went to Eastman, some moved out to Sweden. It was an interesting time. And there's still some kids from the valley Rio Grande Valley, who find a lot of success in music as well.
Nice. So obviously you fell in love with cello and picked it, but if you could play any other instrument just for fun, what would it be?
Well, I guess guitar or piano, because it's so versatile. If I played guitar, I'd love to sing better, to be able to sing and play. I know music therapists, must do that, and it's part of your education. But piano, of course, is nice too. I think cello is perfect for me because I like to be around people. Piano can be a little lonely, because you're just practicing on your own, unless you're mainly an accompanist. But still, playing in an orchestra or a chamber music setting is a lot of fun, very personable. I've thought about that question a lot too. It's like, what would I have done? I wanted to play violin, and I don't think I would have been good at it. It just seems awkward to me.
I think for some violinists, it's even awkward for them. It's like you just sort of get used to having this strange thing sticking out of your neck.
Yeah. I think it's for all of us is who taught you right in the beginning. Because if you get a really good teacher who's patient and gives you the proper setup, you could really do a lot. But it's very difficult if you're not set up well.
So this is going to be a tough question. If you had to pick one of your favorite composers, who would it be?
I do like Brahms. I know one of my friends, he said his father would always say the following, "Aimez-vous Brahms?" And I think it's a good one. I do like Brahms. And I think a lot of us like it. It's kind of cliche. If you read about Brahms, you like him even more. I mean, he was very independent. Some people don't like his relationship with Clara Schumann, but he wrote for himself, and and that's why I think we all like him. Is that he was very independent-minded in that way. But I wish he would have written a cello concerto. So if I were to go back in time, I don't know, I may have to convince him, please write a cello concerto. That would have been great. Although he did write a lot of stuff, a lot of sonatas, and included great melodies for the cello in his orchestra music and chamber music. But, you can't win them all.
Right. He did create some really beautiful sweeping melodies for sure.
Right.
If you could pick a piece of musical advice that you ignore and a piece that you always follow, what would that be?
Well, probably playing with the metronome. So I think I don't do that enough. But I think in the same line of not playing with the metronome, I think I should read the music first without playing it. And, and that could be with the help of a metronome. Suzuki training has taught me a lot of what I'm doing wrong, actually. And so my teacher trainer has taught us how to teach sight reading. So that's one of the first things is just look and see it and observe what's there. And then your mind gets wrapped around what's about to happen. A piece of advice that I always follow, I think I practice slow a lot. That's good. And that's, I wish my students would do that. Maybe that's why I don't practice with a metronome, it's because I'm always practicing slow.
Yeah, it seems like everyone's got a love-hate relationship with the metronome, right?
Yeah, it is a timekeeper, but there are some interesting games you could play with it. The metronome, for example, if you set it at, say, 12/4 or something like that, there is these settings for like 12/8 or 12/4 or something, and you could play around with the idea that, say, you have 4 measures of 3/4, you could have the clicker click only the first beat, so that you could create this rubato within the bar. So only the first beat of the bar is clicking. So you could play games like that in your practice and with your students as well. And some of my students, they know this little trick, and I'll get them to play a whole 4-measure phrase with just one click. And if they could come back to that click again, 4 measures later, then they have pretty good mind control over the tempo. So metronome work can be pretty disheartening, yes, but you can also play some games there.
Yeah, I like that idea. I'm definitely gonna steal that and use that for my own teaching.
Oh yeah, just like take away the internal beats. It's amazing. I mean, you could get pretty complicated clicking on the off beats, for example.
But I really love, the idea of just clicking on at the beginning of a phrase or the beginning of the measure, because it helps build that emotional aspect.
We need that elasticity when we play. What we like about Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra is like they have this rubato in their singing, and maybe it's a little, especially Frank Sinatra, maybe it's a little on the back of the beat, but the band never stops, right? There always has a good rhythm, and they're not so disjunct from the music. It's like right in time, but they sing beautifully. So this is a way to practice, I think, for us too, to keep that in mind, like someone's accompanying you, but you still could feel free to soar above it.
It also keeps things like interesting and a little bit of a variety in practice, because sometimes people fall into sort of a practice rut.
Lately, I've been studying a lot about that. There's a book by Hans Jensen called Practice Mind, and he just completed it, and he had another one called Cello Mind. But Practice Mind is really good for anybody, any teacher of a string instrument, and any music teacher could actually get some ideas from there. But that's one thing he talks a lot about. Yeah, how we could make a variety in our practice, because you can only focus really for 20 minutes. But if you change things up, you could keep playing the same thing except with the variation. We've known this for a long time, but now with these apps and technologies that are afforded to us, we could really extend this. Richard Aaron, another famous teacher, he does a lot of cross rhythms. So maybe you're playing 3 slur, like 3/4, but you're clicking 5/4. So you're doing 3/5/3, yeah, or 3/5. But I'm confused already. But you know what I mean. So,
yes.
So going back to this idea of being elastic and at the same time playing in tempo, I mean, there are ways you can build that and nurture it.
Yeah, I definitely love that idea, because, whether it's teaching someone or you're practicing on your own to get better and reach your goals, it's so easy to just become disheartened or frustrated or fall into the same practice sort of routine. So it's nice to switch things up and breathe new life into that creative process. And speaking of creative process, do you have favorite and least favorite parts about that?
Well, I think my favorite part is thinking up the ideas for the moment, the concert, the recital program, etc. Mike Zura is the executive director of Aperio. We work together a lot, and some of our favorite moments are actually thinking up program titles, which is a lot of fun. Like Americans in Paris, composers in Paris. So he's done that one. It was one of his creations. That's amazing. A title. So that's fun, because you can really use your brain and your knowledge of all kinds of composers and styles and how they connect. And of course, if the audience likes it or not, we don't know, but it's a lot of fun. I guess the business side, that's what gets you down. If you're like involved in both the artistic side and the business side, that could be the bummer because, you're always worried about where the money's coming from or paying everyone and, those kind of things. Artistically, really nothing really bothers me. I think what bothers me is like what everybody else is bothered by. Say, the black sheep around in the group, the stickler, the person doesn't show up on time. But that's about it, really.
Yeah, I completely understand. The business side of the creative process is definitely not as fun and a lot more different than what I think we all imagined when we first started on our creative journeys.
Yeah, a lot of music schools today give classes on the business side, which is great. But we didn't have that when I was in college. We just learned it on the job.
Yeah.
People taught it to us. And I could just say that Excel is your best friend. If you, it's really helpful, and just YouTube's your best friend too. There's a lot of things on YouTube, but don't watch just one video, right? Just study it.
And speaking of social media, how do you think that helps shape the young performers today? Do you think it's good, bad, neutral, or does it really depend on how they use it to become better?
Well, yeah, I think you said that. I use it to become better. Everyone's complaining about kids wasting time on social media, and there are some dangers, especially in the terms of image of a young person, how they imagine themselves next to someone else who's been photoshopped, for example, or an influencer that has such a glamorous life, and wishing we were like them. But if a young musician wants to put on their music, whether it's practice, a sonata, a concerto, or some of their own music, that's amazing. A daily practice of scales or a song that you're working on. A lot of us growing up, we didn't have that. We just had a recorder and shared it with your friends and maybe, but you could really put yourself out there and learn about the creative process on your own. And YouTube is, some people have been discovered this way, obviously. So I think it's, the bad things are still bad, wasting your time and not being creative. So if a young person is finding that they're using, only 5 minutes of every hour creating something and 55 minutes, scrolling, I don't think is a good idea.
And you mentioned the aspect of recording and having that for either their teachers or sending it to friends. And, that's such a wonderful thing we didn't really have as much back then. Like, I remember having to buy blank cassette tapes and recording my practice sessions for my teachers.
Right. And you were lucky, sometimes you have to record over your favorite music, or whatever, because you didn't have any new cassette tapes. And when I was at Rice for my graduate program there, we had mini disc at that time at DAT players, and people used those, and that was really cool because it's all digital and it sounded pretty nice. Nowadays, you just use your phone; it sounds almost as good.
Yeah.
Add on a mic, and it's unbelievable what you could do. I think if there's any advice I'd give to a young person is, take advantage of this time because it's really amazing to have all this. And I tell my students all the time is that when I was young, I really liked Jacqueline Dupre's a famous cellist. And I was so into Jacqueline Dupre that I went to my public library in McAllen and I looked up all her New York Times reviews on microfilm, macrofiche, right? Do you ever seen one of those?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's actually kind of fun. You have to look up the location and dial it in, and you can read what you want to read. Nowadays, you just get a subscription and it's all in the archives. You can see and hear all of her recordings on YouTube. Back then, I paid $50 for a VHS recording of her Elgar concerto. So we've come a long way. And no wonder so many young students play at such a high level.
I've noticed that. I was like, is there something in the water? Mm-hmm. Everyone seems to be like leagues ahead of where I was when I started as a kid.
Yeah, I think it's just the availability, accessibility of everything. Yeah.
So you're a associate professor at Sam Houston. What is one of your favorite things about being a professor?
Well, the students. We get older, but the students are always, young, between 18 and 22. And So, and that brings with it like an energy, no matter what's happening in the world, what problems you're having, whether budgets are being slashed or not, the students are always there, eager to learn. And just like hitting a tennis ball against the wall, the harder you hit that with a racket, the ball comes back to you. It's like the more I give to the students, the more they give back. So it's I could see that as fulfilling for the rest of my life, and same with younger students. The difference between the university students and the younger students is often the younger students are not often there on their own, really. Uh, so you have to convince them it's a lot of fun and play games and, enchant them that way. The older students have some of that, of course, but they chose to be there. Often they're paying their own way. And at our school, some get scholarships and some pay their own way by getting, jobs and things. So they're really dedicated to it. And that's what I like the most is like there's an energy there. They want to learn. The other thing I like about the university is, your colleagues' ability to collaborate on projects together, not only in the music school, but across the School of Art, dance department, media, etc. And of course, some of our professors are collaborating with English professors and others on campus. And lastly is I really love the infrastructure. You have a recital hall, concert hall. It's amazing. It's a beautiful hall, beautiful everything. I don't know if you've seen a campus lately, but it's just beautiful. And so being able to book a recital, as many, I guess they wouldn't want to hear me like 10 times in a month, but once a semester, it's quite remarkable. And knowing how much it costs in town, in Houston, how much it costs to rent a recital hall, that with recording, with piano tuning, etc. It's a lot of money. We're really fortunate to have that.
Speaking of recitals, how do you narrow down what you're going to play? Do you just go based on things that you've always loved, or do you try to infuse a program with something you've never played before?
Well, I tell my students it should be, what do they say about weddings? Like something old, something new, something borrowed,
something
blue. That's like a recital program. You can challenge yourself to play all new things, and I've done that before. But you have to have the time to practice for it. It's a lot of effort, and it is a challenge, though. So basically, I go by that philosophy: is you play something that I've done before, I think the audience really liked, and I found a lot of success with personally, and also for the audience. Blend that in with something that maybe is on a medium level of like I have played it a long time ago, or maybe once I studied it but never played it, and then something new and challenging. My next program is a very meditative program with Fratres of Avopart and meditation from Bernstein's Mass and the Simple Song from the Mass, and the other pieces along in that program from Jewish Life by Ernest Bloch. There are 3 pieces there, very meditative pieces, very strong pieces, and also 3 pieces by Amy Beach, written for violin. Now, these I've never played before. So, and this really actually scared me a little bit, especially the mazurka. My teacher from Eastman recorded them, and it's a beautiful recording. So I guess I have that sound in my ear, so maybe I feel a little bit of pressure right now to play it so well.
How do you typically approach your personal practice sessions, and what is something that you would tell your students that's like a golden nugget of advice?
Well, I think brackets are really good. So bracket off those areas that you need to practice. And so if you're a busy person, you can go back to those brackets or even play them all day long, because sometimes those brackets are maybe 10 seconds long. And to be honest, those are the spots that are the target areas that people practice, right? That arpeggio, that shift, that double stop, awkward bowing, rhythm, etc. The other is I try to look at the form of the music and find that, okay, well, I'm going to play this melody, say 3 times. So already in my head, I understand it's like I've practiced that melody 3 times. It almost is the same bowing and fingering. Maybe there's a little bit of difference in the dynamics. The same thing with any other arpeggio or technical area. I could say like, oh, wow, this is the same in page 2. So try to look at the form and cross-reference. It cuts down a lot of time. And so this is what I try to teach my students as well. Don't practice from the beginning to the end every time. Study it and pick and choose what you're going to play. And pretty soon you have those 5 sections. And okay, now you got your brackets. And that takes about 2 days of practice, really, or maybe 1 day if it's a really short piece. The other thing that a lot of teachers do is that we practice with our students. So I may assign a piece to my student, and I'm playing it too. So that's a little secret. Like assign your student a piece, and you practice with them. It's really helpful.
That's a good idea. What is one of the biggest sectors of music or cello or even pedagogy that you're curious about right now and want to learn more?
I would say it's kind of funny to say this, but it's hypnotism, enchantment, like how to get a student hypnotized without, the typical like magician making them sound like a chicken or whatever. Like I want them to do what I say, but how to make them pay attention is really, really, really hard. And I think in your work, you may deal with students who are on the spectrum. And so sometimes some students, of course, are just hyperactive, and it happens with college students too, right? But the greatest teachers I've seen, they're so in control of the situation. And there's something magical about what they're doing, whether it's a calmness, they know how to make variations on one teaching point for the whole hour without like making it seem obvious, like many of us will do the same bowing and the student gets tired because it's so ridiculous that we keep working on this one thing. So, but some teachers are just amazing at this. And I do believe it's some kind of hypnotic thing. They just know how to, even through Zoom, I've seen it. I've observed this of other teachers. Tanya Carey is this teacher trainer I trained with, and she's 83 years old, still works 30 hours a week. It's amazing. She has magic, yeah. So that's the one thing that you could learn all the tricks. You could read all the books. And, I love to read all the pedagogy books and even the old ones, scale books. I would look at them and try to understand them, left-hand technique books, all that stuff. But it doesn't matter because if you understand that person in front of you, you could make them play. And some people do it without even touching the cello. They just show them, like tell them how to do it. And it is so magical.
It's definitely an art, teaching and connecting with people, for sure. We're going to switch gears to a fun question. What is one of your favorite things to eat after a concert or a gig?
Here in Houston, there's just so much you could choose. We used to go to Dolce Vita on Westheimer, but they closed down, unfortunately. I don't know why. They were really great, and they were open late enough that we can go. So a pizza is good. Sometimes I don't like something too heavy. It's difficult because if you eat before a concert, you don't feel that good. Your stomach feels like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten that. So you got to time that well. But then after the concert, you also don't want to eat too much because then you feel terrible, can't sleep, you're too hyper, So, but I think something small, salty, something like that. Pizza, French fries, but not like a big dinner,
Yeah. It's always interesting. Everyone's got such diverse answers about their after-concert meals. I'm a fan of the burger and fries team there.
Actually, shareables are good. Like something like just this share something small, snacks.
If you had to pick intro music or a theme song to your life, what do you think that would be?
Probably just 2-3 notes, like with the guitar, like da-da-da or something like this,
I love that.
Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm.
It's kind of comical flamenco sound. It's kind of half serious, half funny. I think that's, or, just the E major chord on a guitar. And, you could play it. It's pretty easy to learn. And you could also play it with some flair.
If you could bring back any creative person from the grave to meet them, who would it be?
Oh, definitely Nikola Tesla.
Ooh.
Yeah. I like his story. And, to think, and he sort of, he was probably the first, I don't know if he was a conspiracy theorist, but probably he was, He was like, that guy stole my idea and things like that. But I think that would be cool to meet someone like him who was just almost mystical in his creations, you know.
Mhm.
In a musical sense, I really don't know, because going back to that idea of a cello concerto that I wish Brahms would have written, it's like that butterfly effect. If you ask, should you go back to Brahms, or should I really talk to Beethoven, or should I talk with Mozart, or right,
Yeah.
or Bach? I mean, how far are you going to go back? You know, Palestrina. You know, so I don't know, but it would have been fun, I guess. I don't know, to bring. I guess Brahms would have been okay. Have a beer with him.
There you go. But yeah, it's always a tough choice because there's so much great music.
Yeah, and now we're discovering a lot of people that whose music was suppressed. You know, from
Mhm. Mhm.
because of, say, the composers that are in the Holocaust, or female composers, or African American composers were never discovered. You know, besides outside their own community. So it's a lot of fun to discover that as well.
I'm going to jump back to a serious question because I'm sure you deal with this quite a bit being a professor and teaching students in a wide sector of their life, whether it's younger all the way through college. How do you help students through a tough time, like in terms of burnout or feeling really frustrated with the actual learning of the instrument?
With a younger student, you always can encourage them, of course, personally, make it a lot of fun for them, change things up. I try to follow a system in my teaching that has like basically 6 parts in the lesson and should be done at home as well. But of course, you have to make adjustments depending on the mood of the child. Maybe also if they're in public school orchestra, maybe they have a big audition, or youth orchestra. We got to work on that music. That also can be done with the parent all the way through high school. With college kids, university students, that's a little tougher. Sometimes you got to let them go and they could come back. I recently had a student who had an operation on his hand. And I think before that, he had a lot of pain. And so he was quite depressed, I think, by it. Well, anyway, so much so that he wanted to switch majors. And I just let it happen, and he came back, and now he's much healthier because he got this operation and helped him, and he's healthy. So sometimes that happens with students. Other times you just have to guide them if they're old enough. In some extreme cases, they need counseling, and that's where as a professor, you just show them the door of the counseling center. It's you got to get some help there, but really they see me 3 times a week because I have a technique class on Monday, their lesson, and then studio class. So you have to be that coach, who's like always encouraging them. I don't know if it ever works because students don't tell you these things like thank you. They don't say thank you. But sometimes you get a thank you. And recently, one of my students posted on Facebook, she graduated, and she had a little paragraph thanking me and help for my encouragement. And I just thought I was doing my job, So that meant a lot to me. I really appreciated it because sometimes you don't know if it's working. But, we just keep doing that, having a positive attitude. And professionally, you want to also model what they should be acting like as well.
Very true. Very true. What is a common stereotype about being a musician that you hope to break with your work as a performer and a professor?
I don't know if I hope to break it, but I know one common stereotype is like, how do you make money? And it's hard. It's hard to make money if all you do is just want to play the cello. When I was younger, we all started off like, oh, I want to be like Yo-Yo Ma, play with the New York Phil and travel the world. Then eventually you're like, I want to play in a string quartet, travel the world in a string quartet, because you discover, that's actually a job. Then you say, I want to play in an orchestra. But the reality is that it's, even though the best conservatories are graduating really high level students, there's very few of those jobs compared to the amount of people graduating. So, the versatility is a number one word, be able to have a versatility in your playing. And so different styles, be able to teach a little bit, know how to do that. You don't have to dedicate your whole life to it, but it definitely can be a source of joy and, of course, income. Going back to this idea of making money, when I was living in Paris, people asked me what I did, and they said, I said I play the cello, and they said, "Oh, wonderful! You're an artist," Whereas in America, they asked me what I did. I say I play the cello, and they would say, "How do you make any money?" So there was a big difference there. I think being versatile though can help in terms of living a fulfilling life.
Agreed. It's so important for creative people to find outlets to express themselves or to learn new things and new ways to express. And sometimes if you get sort of stuck in one type of position, it's harder to really branch out. What is something you wish you had first known about the creative journey when you first started?
Yeah, I often thought about that, like what I would tell myself. I think I practiced enough between ages 11 to 18, but I think I would have told myself right before, if I could go back and see myself go on that airplane to Rochester, New York. Actually, no, my brother drove me. That's right. Before I got in the car, I would have said, practice a lot more than you think. But, I would also said, perform a lot, because that's a kind of practice as well. I did practice a lot in certain spots of, like in spurts of your life, so, eras where like 1 or 2 years you practice a lot. But I think I could have done a lot more. But that's the way I feel. I always feel like I was catching up to everyone. Because when I was 11, I didn't know anything. Then going to meeting people at different music festivals, and then going to Eastman, you meet people that were playing the cello since 5 years old. So I always felt that I was catching up.
Yeah. That's the thing about music. There's always so many people that start early and they just sort of like, it seems to rocket past everyone else, where it's like, hey, well, hang on there. My school didn't have a program till I was 10 or 11 or 12,
Right.
But, the important thing is just still finding your passion and going for it no matter what, because you never know what it can turn into. Like for yourself, it turns into you being a professor and being able to share your love of music and the cello with the world.
Mhm.
And can you imagine if you decided to go a different route?
I probably would have been a baseball coach or something.
Hmm.
I like baseball.
Baseball is fun. So you mentioned that you like to read pedagogy books. Are there any, in addition to Cello Mind and Practice Mind, that you recommend for people?
Oh, well, those are really top books right now. I recommend Tanya Carey's Cello Playing is Easy series of books. That first volume is quite amazing. It seems at first a little daunting to see because there's so much information, but once you just wrap your head around how she organizes it, it's super helpful for any teacher. She also has a scale book that helps organize the teaching of scales. And there's just so many of those books. Lately, I've been interested in also like reading books on like, sports psychology and stuff. But there was one I bought. I haven't read it yet, but it's called Peak. I'm under the impression it involves like stories and research on athletes and musicians and how they practice and perform. I think that's very important for teachers to understand so they could practice it themselves, but also teach it.
I completely agree. It's so important to, even if someone didn't necessarily study psychology, to understand the psychology of learning and learning styles and what happens when someone reaches a certain modicum of success and where their head sort of goes when they try to focus and practice after that and things of that nature.
Right. There are a lot of great little stories in these books that one can use in teaching. And one of them is they've taken, say, a group of basketball players, and maybe 10 of them are practicing free throws, and the other 10 are just imagining it, visualizing it. And I'm not too sure how long they did this for, but let's just say a period of time, 5 days or something. Afterwards, they tested them out, and there was really no difference, or maybe the people that visualized it were a little bit better. But yeah, that's really true. You can visualize practicing. In our lessons, I often ask my students to do that. It's a lot of fun.
That is a really good idea. Visualizing, okay, how do you want to start this? What kind of sound do you want to make? What is your posture going to look like? Things of that nature.
Yeah.
Final question before we go, and that is, in your own words, what does it mean to live a creative life?
I think just waking up and doing just a little bit better every day and creating something just one tiny percent positive that day for the whoever you meet. That's what I like about teaching. I get to meet a lot of different kinds of people. Also, the parents of younger children. They're in different professions, different walks of life. And I think a lot lately of this Bob Dylan song, this What Good Am I? Have you heard that song?
Mm.
It's a really good song, but sometimes I think that when I wake up, it's like, what good am I? It's like, well, let's go out and do something positive. And as a creative person, you could take that and because sometimes creating means that you are doing something again the same way, the same repertoire, the same show, the same sonata, whatever you're doing. But there's some things that are always changing. Like the student could be different, the ensemble is different, the venue's different, production's different, audience is different. So there's a lot to think about.
So I know I said that was the last question, but is there anything else you'd like to leave with our listeners before we go?
If you're a teacher, I know a lot of teachers are discouraged lately for many reasons, but don't be discouraged because you're making a difference. And maybe you need to take a break. It's healthy to take a break. But we are called to be teachers for a reason. We need to change people's lives in a positive way. And music really does that. So don't give up.
Excellent. Wonderful words to end on. Daniel Saenz, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Listeners, please check the show notes for his full bio and relevant links. As always, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.